I live a life that many would call ideal. A happy family with a husband I love and two well-behaved kids. My life flows in a series of quiet, uneventful days, with no big ups and downs. Everything is fine, but deep inside, I feel like something important is missing. Maybe I'm too used to this stability, but sometimes, stability can be the most dangerous thing. When everything around me stays the same, I start wondering if this life is really all there is. Am I losing myself in the whirlwind of being a wife, a mother, and a woman whose only role is to take care of the family? Eric, my husband, isn't a bad person. He's a kind, hard-working man, always taking care of the family. But the longer I live with him, the more I feel like just a small part of a big machine, an essential wheel in the gears of our life. He loves me in his way, but that love has slowly faded into something routine. We spend quiet evenings together. He's fast asleep while I stay awake, weighed down by my thoughts. We're no longer close, no longer sharing deep talks, no more tight hugs or gentle kisses. We've lost that connection a long time ago, without even realizing it. Throughout my years as a wife, I didn't notice that I wasn't myself anymore. I had become a mother, a wife, but I forgot that I was a woman. One morning, like any other, I got a call from school. A former student of mine, Jake, wanted to meet. He was one of the students I felt was special, not because he was smarter or more talented than the others, but because of his early maturity, which made me feel a special connection with him. Jake had once been in my class, but now he had graduated and was living his own life. When I met him again on a sunny morning, I couldn't help but notice how much he'd changed. Jake was no longer that young, innocent boy. He had become a confident, mature, and very attractive man. He looked at me differently, not like a student looks at a teacher, but the way a man looks at a woman. After that meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. He kept coming back to me in my thoughts, in the conversations we had. It felt like I had found a part of myself in him, a part I had forgotten about in all the years of living in a stable but empty marriage. But I couldn't shake off this strange feeling. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence, just a fleeting moment, but my heart wouldn't let it go. That yearning to be seen, to be noticed, something I hadn't felt in so long, suddenly came alive again. Every time I met Jake, I couldn't help but feel unsettled. Yet at the same time, I felt more alive than ever. Our conversations became deeper. We talked about bigger issues, things about life that I hadn't thought about in a long time. I wasn't sure if I was looking for an escape or if I had simply found someone who understood me, but I felt like I was coming back to life. Jake never directly said anything, but I could feel the shift in his eyes. He didn't see me just as a teacher anymore, but as a real woman. After each of our meetings, when I looked into his eyes, I felt like I was being pulled into a powerful force. Something inside me had changed forever. The next day, I received a message from Jake. He wanted to meet me, just to talk. I didn't know what to do. Inside, I felt this strange conflict. I wanted to meet him, but I was afraid it would lead to emotions I couldn't control. I had spent so many years maintaining a stable family life, and now I felt like I was on the verge of a huge change. I agreed to meet him at a small cafe where there wouldn't be too many people. I sat waiting, watching the people come and go, but I couldn't calm myself. Every little noise, every time the door opened, I flinched. And then he walked in. The soft afternoon light seemed to highlight his presence. He was no longer the young guy I once knew, but a confident, mature man with deep, intense eyes. He smiled, and I felt something in that smile, not just the greeting of an old friend. Jake sat across from me, and we began to talk. But this time, our conversation wasn't just about old memories or short, casual questions like before. We talked about life, about the changes over the years. He told me about his job, the people he met, and the challenges he faced. But what caught my attention wasn't what he said. It was the way he looked at me. There was a focus, an attention that I hadn't felt from my husband in a long time. I knew he wasn't looking at me like a teacher, but as a woman. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. The feeling of being seen, of being appreciated. Then he asked me a question that I couldn't answer immediately. Have you ever felt lonely? I looked into his eyes, not knowing how to respond. That question hit me hard, making me realize that yes, I had been lonely, not because I lacked love, but because I lacked connection. I had lived in a long marriage, but intimacy had faded. I was no longer a woman in my husband's eyes. I was just a wife, a mother. Jake waited for my response. I didn't say anything, just sat in silence, and then he continued. I don't want you to feel that way. I think you deserve to be loved and cherished. His words made my heart ache. I couldn't explain why, but part of me just wanted to hear more of them. Eventually, we sat in silence for a while. Words couldn't express all the emotions I was feeling. My feelings for Jake weren't just about being fond of an old friend. It was something deeper, a connection I couldn't explain. And in that moment, I realized something. I was no longer the woman I used to be. I hadn't felt desired in so long. When I left, I felt like something inside me was shifting. I couldn't forget the way Jake looked at me, the way he saw me, not as a teacher, but as a woman. And I knew that I couldn't stop thinking about him. From that day on, every time I thought about Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling of longing. He had done something I never expected. He made me feel alive again. Every time I met him, I found myself caught in an inner battle. I loved my husband, but I couldn't deny that I felt this special pull towards Jake. It wasn't just a fleeting crush. It was a longing for something deeper. It was the desire to be loved, to be seen as a real woman, not just a wife or mother. A feeling I had forgotten during all those years of living together. The next day, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. I didn't just see the woman of the family. I saw a woman who had the right to love and be loved. I started dressing differently, choosing different hairstyles, feeling like I was coming back to life. But inside, I was anxious, afraid that if I kept going down this path, I would lose everything. So, I continued to struggle with my feelings, torn between my love for my husband and the yearning for something new that Jake brought into my life. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Even though I tried to focus on work and family, he was always in my mind. I didn't know how to face this feeling. My love for my husband was still there, but the attraction and attention I felt from Jake was undeniable. It was like a small flame burning in my heart, one I couldn't put out no matter how hard I tried. Every time I met Jake, I felt this magnetic pull. He never said I love you, but the way he looked at me, the way he treated me, made me feel important. It made me realize that something was missing in the years I spent with Eric. The closeness between Eric and me had faded, while with Jake, everything felt fresh and full of life. One evening, after Eric had gone on a business trip, I agreed to meet Jake again. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt like I couldn't keep avoiding these feelings. When he arrived, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me with understanding in his eyes. The feeling was suffocating, my heart racing. He took my hand and led me outside, to a place where it was just the two of us. We didn't need to speak much. Each touch, each glance, seemed to say everything. I couldn't resist the powerful pull from him. And then he kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss, full of emotion. For the first time in a long time, I felt loved, seen. This feeling was completely different from what I had experienced with Eric. It made me feel alive, like I was still a woman of value, After that kiss, we didn't speak much more. We just sat together in silence. But that silence meant everything. I knew that this was a turning point, that I couldn't go back to how things were before. My feelings for Jake weren't just about infatuation. It was the longing for a real connection, something beyond the emptiness of the routine I had been living. The days that followed, I continued to meet Jake. Each time we met, I felt like I was coming back to life. The feeling of wanting to be loved, cared for, and seen was something Jake gave me, something Eric had stopped providing for so long. But that desire made me feel torn inside. I couldn't ignore my husband, the man I had shared my life with, the father of my children. Even though our connection had faded, I couldn't deny that I had a family, a stable life. Yet I couldn't stop feeling this attraction to Jake, this feeling of being alive whenever I was with him. I asked myself, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I betraying my husband? But if I don't do this, will I continue to live in a life of dullness and loneliness forever? Is this relationship worth sacrificing everything for? And if I continue this relationship, can I face the consequences? After that kiss, we didn't say anything more. We just sat there in silence, but that silence spoke volumes. I knew this was a turning point, that I couldn't go back to how things were. My feelings for Jake weren't just infatuation. It was a longing for a real connection, not the fake routine of the stable yet dull years I had spent. In the days that followed, I continued to meet Jake. Each time, I felt like I was coming back to life. That feeling was the yearning to be loved, to be cared for, and most importantly, to be seen. Jake made me feel that way, something Eric hadn't been able to do for a long time. He didn't look at me as a wife or a mother, but as a real woman, someone he cared about. But that longing started creating conflict inside me. I couldn't ignore my husband, the man I had spent so many years with, the father of my children. Even though the love between us had slowly faded, I couldn't deny the fact that I had a family, a stable life. At the same time, I couldn't stop feeling drawn to Jake, unable to ignore the way he made me feel alive again every time I was with him. I asked myself, am I doing something wrong? Am I betraying my husband? But if I don't do this, will I live in this dullness and loneliness forever? Is this relationship worth everything I would have to give up? And if I continue this, can I face the consequences? Every night, when I lay next to Eric, I felt a huge distance between us. I knew we were living in a marriage where neither of us was truly happy, but we couldn't say it out loud. Every morning, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a tired, disheartened woman. But when I thought about Jake, I felt more alive than ever. I couldn't walk away from him, but I couldn't walk away from my family either. This emotional tug-of-war kept tearing me apart, making it hard for me to sleep, focus on work, or even think clearly. I started worrying about what I was doing, but at the same time, I didn't want to give up the feeling of being loved and cared for by Jake. Every time I saw him, I felt like I couldn't go back to the way things were before. My life seemed to be caught between two worlds. On one side, there was my family, the duties and responsibilities I had committed to. On the other side, there was Jake, a new, exciting, and longing emotion I had never thought I would experience. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I couldn't escape the thoughts of him. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman I used to be. I wasn't just a woman living for her family anymore. I was a woman who craved to be loved and to live for herself. Jake changed me. He made me feel important, made me feel like I was seen as a real person, not just a wife or a mother who had been forgotten in the routine of family life. But I knew this couldn't last forever. This relationship, although short-lived, was a huge violation, and I couldn't continue living in this conflict between reason and emotion. Every time I met Jake, I felt like he looked at me as a woman he wanted to protect, love, and cherish. He never pressured me. He simply made me feel special, made me feel valued. That felt incredible, but I knew that with every meeting, I was moving further away from my current life. That day, after spending the evening with Jake, I came home and found Eric sitting on the couch, watching TV. He didn't look at me, didn't ask about my day, didn't ask if anything was different. I felt his coldness. It made me realize how distant we had become. What had I done with my life, and had I broken something that could never be fixed? One night, when we were lying together, I felt the distance between Eric and me more clearly than ever. He was sleeping soundly, while I was wide awake. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts spun in circles. Jake had become such an important part of my life, but I couldn't leave my family behind. Guilt overwhelmed me. I didn't want to betray Eric, but I couldn't stop the feelings that Jake had awakened in me. There were times when I thought I could continue living this way, but I couldn't bear the dishonesty anymore. I couldn't live in two worlds. I loved my husband, but I also loved the feeling of being loved and cared for by Jake. As time passed, I knew this relationship would have to end. It couldn't last forever, but I didn't know how to continue my life. I didn't know how to live with the conflict between my family and my feelings for Jake. One evening, when Eric was away on a business trip, I couldn't hold myself back any longer. I texted Jake, and he came over. This time, we didn't talk much. It was just the looks, the light touches, and then we kissed, wrapped up in each other like lovers reunited after a long time. I couldn't resist this feeling anymore, but I knew I was walking down a path that couldn't be undone. The feeling after we were together was strange. I didn't regret what happened, but I could feel clearly that everything had changed forever. Jake didn't just make me feel alive. He made me realize what I had lost over the years. I wasn't just a wife, a mother. I was still a woman who deserved to be loved and cherished. I knew this relationship couldn't last forever. Jake would graduate, and I'd have to go back to my life. But in that moment, I couldn't think about the future. I was just living in the present, in the feeling of being loved and cared for, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Eventually, time passed, and Jake graduated. He left, like a breeze, leaving behind an immense emptiness. I went back to my stable life, but I knew I couldn't go back to how things were before. I had changed. I had found a part of myself that I had lost. Eric didn't ask me about these changes. He didn't ask why I started taking better care of myself, why I wore nicer clothes, or why I was smiling more than before. But I knew I was different. I wasn't just the woman living for her family anymore. I had found myself in the feeling of being loved and seen. Though I returned to my life, I would never forget the emotions Jake brought into my life. He had changed me, made me realize that I could still live, still love, and be loved. I couldn't go back to the stability I once had because I had found a part of myself that I couldn't let go of. In the end, I realized I couldn't keep living in the conflict between family and personal emotions. My relationship with Jake made me feel loved, but I chose family. I learned to love myself and found myself again. Although it wasn't perfect, I chose family because that's where I found safety and connection. Life never has a perfect ending, but I found my way. Sometimes, we have to sacrifice certain things to gain what's more important. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more emotional stories and valuable life lessons.